Before I introduce myself, I just want to thank you for the tone that you set when you commenced and also that you continue to present yourselves with tonight. It's very relaxing and it's very appreciated, and the belief is that you're listening and you're hearing what we're saying. So thank you for that. My name's Rob Wood. I come from Rome. I teach chemistry. I'm a union leader in Rome, and I'm also a parent and a grandparent. So a lot of vested interests with the background that I bring. In one word, this has been absolutely devastating. The teachers' morale, never ever have I seen anything like this. And I'm not sure where I am. I think 21 years into teaching, and it's horrific. They do their best when they get into the rooms to act as if things are okay. Kids sense things. It's been absolutely devastating for the children. We went around the buildings. I teach at a high school, and the union officers went around to all of the buildings in Rome, and we have several elementary schools, junior high and a high school. And almost brought me to tears what I was hearing from what's occurring in those classrooms, and abuse and neglect of the children. And it made me feel so much worse coming out than going in. Here we're going in to uplift the teachers' spirits and such, and that wasn't the case at all. So absolutely devastating. I've got an 8-year-old, Jack, and he struggles at times with school to a high degree this year. He's been, prior to this year, okay, but I certainly sense his level of stress and duress and pain and suffering. So there's one word for you, and I'd like to share later on. I'll mail to you some testimonials from some of the people who I work with to give you a sense, some of what we've heard tonight, and actually others that are along the same lines, but certainly much different. And I can't do it justice because I teach chemistry at the high school, so I don't see it yet, the damage that's been done. So I've tossed aside what I've written to you, and off script is, to certainly halt the Common Core, diminish, eliminate the high stakes testing, and a third plea is to focus on literacy. And I'll talk a little bit more about that, I guess now. They mentioned data collection, and to me, if someone's going to be able to jump high, you don't prevent them from walking, and you feed them, and you let them sleep, and you find out what's good for them. And then to later on collect data to see what their eye color may be or their race, that to me has nothing to do with it. And so we're going away from what we know, and we're getting into things that don't matter. And that just blows my mind as a scientist. To me, the two pieces of data associated with education, or the lack thereof, are poverty and literacy. Anybody in the business, if you could allow them to choose what raw materials they're going to bring in to produce whatever it is they have as output, they're going to take the best. And that would just stand to reason. Same thing with education, that if perhaps at a very young age we can get children to become readers, I think that solves the problem. So the big picture, that big snapshot I wanted to present today is, I think that's the attack, because if we can tackle illiteracy, I think that we're going to have a stronger nation, and we're going to have better graduates, college and career ready. And with poverty, they can't do it. A single parent working 2 or 3 jobs, they can't read to the kids. So I'll get off that soapbox. I mean, the true test of learning. True test of learning is if you can take something perceived to be known and teach it to somebody else. So my 8-year-old Jack struggles with math problems. My 12-year-old son Brady helps Jack, and by the time it's all said and done, they're fighting with each other because Jack says you can't do it that way, and the Common Core is doing exactly the opposite what on paper it intended to do. And I see this again with my sons on numerous levels of they're putting them in a box rather than allowing them to think outside of it. And the reality is the practice is making things worse. It's not making things any better at all. couple more things and I'll be quiet. Anytime you implement something, I'm not too swift. I'm going to do a little bit at a time. So to me, one big change that they should have done, and I'm not saying that I agree with the Common Core, start at the level of kindergarten, and the next year phase it in and get it to kindergarten and first grade. And if you want to track data, go ahead. Now you've got some means of analysis. This whole thing was set up to fail. And the ripple effects on this are once again going to be devastating. In the classrooms now, they're hammering out ELA. In the classrooms now, they're hammering out math. Why? Because those are the two that really are big time tested. And what they're dismissing now is science. And that hurts us as a nation. And these kids are going to come to me, not because of the teacher's fault, not because of parents' fault, but because of the system. So what a crazy approach to say, let's wholesale try this. And sadly, we're here because of the outcome. I'll wrap up with a couple of, I guess I'll call them charges to you and challenges. Let's assume that things are going to be redirected here, and turning a ship around in the ocean takes a lot of time, and we know that, and hopefully we can expedite it. And the scary thing now beyond this is, how do we regain what we've lost? Math in particular is cumulative. They've already lost, in my mind, 2.5 months of education. When do these kids get this back? And I hear that from parents here, and I applaud them for stepping up and speaking, and I hear that from the parent groups in Rome, that the harm that's done is done, and how do you adjust that? And I don't know if there is an answer to that. Second thing is, most of us in the world, if we don't sit by, we're either part of the problem or part of the solution. And I'm sensing, thank God, that you are part of the solution. And maybe this forum should have been held closer to Easter than Thanksgiving, and I don't mean this in a biblical sense, but you guys are the Messiah. You will be those who resurrect education the way it should be run. And if you don't, we're sunk. We're sunk as a community. We're sunk as parents. We're sunk as a nation. So I'm really happy to hear what I sense that I'm hearing from you, and I look to the future, and I'm like an elephant and I don't forget. So certainly come voting time, we need you, and I thank you.
Sir, can I just, because I think as a, science area teacher, number one, you made a great point, because we've been talking in recent years about how important science is to get us ahead, and then all of a sudden we're brushing it off to, do other things, which seems to turn on its head what everybody's been talking about probably the last decade in terms of what we needed to focus on. But coming at things from also a scientific perspective, I'm sure when you're teaching your students, as I'm sure we all did as we went through high school and went through the different subject areas, and in particular with science, I'm sure you have students who they see the periodic table on the wall and their eyes light up because this is an interest to them. And then you have others that don't, necessarily have an interest in that, but you're charged with teaching them basics of this area of study, and I'm sure a lot of it is trying to bring it home to them. There are certain things that are going to appeal to a student who may not be interested, but they may see some real world application of something and say, oh, you know what, that makes sense. I learned something because it needed to be more real to me. And my concern with all of this is this whole idea of teaching one way, especially on the math side, and I guess it may be coming on the science side of the whole one way of doing something, and it may appeal to some students and the light bulb goes off and they're good, but what about the students who need to come at it from some other perspective?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to answer anything. Here's what I think I heard you say is, what are you doing? What are you doing now that might be beneficial versus in the future? Philosophically, I try to teach it a certain way. And then when the kids don't get it, you regroup, and teaching to the middle, someone had mentioned, and I'll send comment later on in mail to all of you, taking some notes, but and then they try to teach it a second way. And normally when it comes time for the test and kids to interact and do some cooperative learning activities, I don't care how they learn it and how they can get it done, because ultimately there's numerous ways, in fact, to get to the end. So as they travel through life, you'd hope that it was a journey and not as we're doing now in Common Core, a destination, point A, point B, point C. Scary. It's scary.
Now, and you're a union person, and you talk to the other teachers. One of the things that's just occurring to me, one of the statements that you made is the damage that we're doing to these kids. And what's going through my mind right now is, what are we going to do with all these kids that get left back? And what's that going to do with their system? And some schools, I think you're going to have a bigger percentage of children that are being left back, like the poorer schools, right? The poorer areas, they're going to get a larger percentage of students left back. I mean, how is this going to affect the system that we have in place right now? So if a quarter of the class gets left back, what is that going to do to the system that we do have in place?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to further strain it, obviously, and it's going to make larger class sizes, which isn't good, and it's going to break traditions. It's going to break self-esteem, if you will. Not that I'm huge on that at the high school level, but point taken. And this is already set up for failure, and now you take your comment, thank you, it makes it even worse. So years to come, oh, absolutely, without a doubt, that if you're not going to prepare them at the lower grade levels to succeed at the higher grade levels, well, not preparing and not going to have success, you're going to get the opposite, and just what you said.
So this is going to affect, deconstruct what we've done in education.
Absolutely. So, and I hadn't thought of it until you mentioned it, but another downfall as a result of what we're implementing now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry. For much of my adult life, I've been led to believe, and I have to ask this question, I don't want to get too far afield, but that New York State's public schools are K through 12 were superior to anything else out there, that if you got a diploma from New York and you went to Tennessee or you went to Florida and you proved to them you graduated from New York school, you had a job on the spot. The wonks in Albany will tell you that we spend probably either the top or second to the top in terms of per capita expenditures for our schools. We pay pretty hefty local property taxes. And all of a sudden, it seemed overnight, and somebody talked about a manufactured crisis perhaps, but overnight, all of a sudden, and now there's some of the literature I'm seeing, we're lagging behind virtually everywhere. What happened? How did it happen? And when did it happen? Do you have any thoughts on this? I know you talked about illiteracy, and I know you've talked about the socioeconomic. Is it a function of the economy? Are our best and brightest packing up U-Haul and moving out because there aren't opportunities here? What happened over the last decade that?
Well, and I've been capable of answering. I'm not too swift. You got to be up. You got to be well versed. You got to know economics. But yeah, thanks. Not answering the question. I'm good at that, I guess.
Because I'll tell you, I've talked to community college presidents. They say the remediation rate for incoming freshmen is somewhere between 50 and 70% in math and reading comprehension.
Well, I think in specialty areas, as long as they're trainable. And so, we get them in New York State, or historically, we would get them to a point where they could do numerous things that are job related. And they may not be college ready, but the kids would be career ready. And I have a neighbor who happens to be a bigwig in the corporation, and he said to me numerous times, he says, we got to get the kids there. And attendance in many schools is horrific, and this may, to point of a couple questions, it might become worse instead of better. But he said attendance is one thing, their ability to interact with one another is a second, and then to also be open-minded and cooperative. So, all that could be flushed down the toilet with the stress and strain that the system is under.
And that's all incidental to the Common Core.
Correct.
Yeah.
A lot of connections with it.
But I don't know how we can find a solution until we can identify the problem, and I just don't know what happened. And I've asked a lot of educational professionals, and I get a whole a series of different answers. I don't know.
It seemed when it wasn't broke and people tried to fix things, all of a sudden things got broken. So historically, the changes haven't been good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.